Imagine this. At your own mother's birthday party, she publicly insults your wife just because she hasn't had children. What would you do? Would you stay silent and endure it? Or would you stand up for the person you love, even if it means confronting your mother? That's precisely what my wife and I went through 3 years ago. Let me tell you the story of what happened next. Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Miller. I'm 32 and a San Jose, California, tech company software engineer. These days, my life revolves around the 3 most important women: Emily, my wife, our 1-year-old daughter, Ava, and Grandma Carol, 83 years old, the woman who completely changed our lives. We currently live in a 3-bedroom house in Mountain View. It's a small, cozy home, but it's where we rebuilt our lives after major upheavals in the family. To Emily and me, Grandma isn't just a relative. She's the one who stood up for us when my mother insulted Emily for not having children. And she did it right in the middle of my mom's 55th birthday party 3 years ago. That moment turned our entire family dynamic upside down. After that whole family drama, Emily, Grandma, and I cut ties with the toxic relatives in our lives. Emily and I met back when we were both in college. She majored in elementary education, and I studied information technology. After we graduated and landed stable jobs, we got married. I was 25 at the time, and Emily was 23. Once we moved in together, we started talking about having a baby. Like most young couples, we thought things would happen naturally, but it turned out to be far more difficult than we had imagined. Over the next 4 years, we saw doctors everywhere, from Stanford Hospital to UCSF Medical Center, trying every option available, from hormone treatments to IVF. But the child we quietly wished and prayed for night after night never came. What made it all the more confusing and frustrating was that we were completely healthy. Meanwhile, my younger brother Austin, a year younger than I but got married a year before I did, already had 2 adorable kids. And that became the very thing my mother used to make constant, cutting comparisons between my wife Emily and Austin's wife, Morgan. During family gatherings, my mom would often act cold toward Emily, sometimes even saying cruel things like, "She doesn't know how to have kids," or worse. There was even a time she told behind Emily's back, "Emily probably used drugs when she was younger. That's why she can't get pregnant." When I heard those words, I confronted my mother directly and told her not to insult Emily. That time, my mom scoffed and said, "I was only joking." After such incidents, I stopped bringing my wife to family dinners or parties. Unlike my mother, Grandma always supported us. She would say, "Children come when fate decides. When the time is right, the baby will show up." She often reminded us not to give up. Her genuine words gave us a sense of comfort during those painful years. As for my dad, he never said much about the situation. In truth, with his passive nature, he would usually avoid any family tension. After asking my mother to treat Emily better a few times, I kept thinking that she would eventually change. But I had no idea things would get worse, and that everything would come to a breaking point on my mother's 55th birthday. 3 years ago, my mother's 55th birthday party was held at Grandma Carol's house in Palo Alto. She bought that spacious 5-bedroom home in 2000, before the Bay Area real estate market skyrocketed. Since my dad is her only child, and my grandfather passed away early due to heart disease, she invited our whole family to move in with her back in 2010. It wasn't just a financial gesture. She wanted to be surrounded by family. And unless anything changes, that house will be divided into 3 parts after she's gone, just as she clearly outlined in her will years ago. 1 part for my parents, 1 for me, and 1 for Austin. At first, when I got the birthday invitation from my mom via text, I didn't plan to go. I was exhausted by how she always looked down on Emily. The judgmental stares, snide remarks, and loaded silences. I wanted to stay far away from those family gatherings, but my wife convinced me otherwise. Emily reasoned that if we didn't show up, my mother would use it as another excuse to stir up trouble. More importantly, Emily told me she missed Grandma and wanted to see her. After my wife's patient persuasion, I agreed to take her to the party. Even though I knew my mom didn't like Emily, I still held on to this naive hope that the party would go smoothly. I thought maybe my mom might show a little kindness on her birthday. But that day, I made the mistake of bringing my wife to that party. That day, we arrived at the house fairly early, around 4:30 in the afternoon. Grandma's place was only about a 40-minute drive from where we lived at the time. Emily sat beside me in the car, clutching her purse tightly like bracing herself for battle. As we walked into the house, I was surprised by how many people were there. Around 25 relatives had shown up, quite a bit more than in previous years. It seemed like my mom wanted to throw a big party to mark her 55th birthday. My younger brother Austin, his wife Morgan, and their 2 young kids were among the guests. Tommy was 5, and Emma, 3, were running around the house laughing nonstop. I saw my mother doting on them as much as possible, hugging, kissing, and praising them in front of everyone. As soon as Emily and I stepped in, my mother raised her voice like she wanted the whole room to hear. Tommy is so smart. He already knows the entire alphabet. And Emma too. So clever, she can count to 20. I knew she was doing it on purpose so we'd hear, but I chose to ignore it. A few familiar relatives greeted us with polite smiles and asked how work was going. Uncle Alan, my dad's cousin, came over, shook my hand, and asked, "Daniel, how's work treating you?" My mom's older sister, Aunt Eliana, greeted Emily warmly and asked about her teaching job. After saying our hellos, we made our way to see Grandma. She was sitting in her usual armchair in the living room, wearing a soft blue cardigan and smiling warmly as she saw us. She hugged Emily tightly and gently scolded us. "Why don't you come visit me more often? I miss you, Emily." At that moment, my mom was nearby, arranging dessert plates on the table. I looked straight at Grandma and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Someone in this family isn't exactly fond of Emily. That's why we don't visit often." The room went quiet. My mom froze for a second but didn't turn around. After a short silence, Grandma replied with a warm but firm tone, "This is my house, and my doors are always open to both of you." Her words touched Emily. She took Grandma's hand and said, "We'll come by more often. I'm sorry if we made you worry." As Emily said that, I glanced over at my mother. She was staring at us with eyes sharp as knives. You could feel the tension, but I could see something beyond that sharpness. Anger, and maybe jealousy. When she noticed I was looking at her, she quickly turned away and started chatting with a nearby neighbor. Around 5:30, the party officially began. Everyone gathered in the large dining room, where my mom had prepared a big birthday cake. After the entire family sang, "Happy Birthday," and she blew out the candles with visible emotion, we all took our seats at the long dining table. For the first 30 minutes, everything felt normal. People ate, chatting about work, the weather, and everyday life. Tommy and Emma were allowed to sit at the main table, and the kids behaved well. At that point, I started to relax a little, thinking things might be okay. But then, right when the room was filled with cheerful conversation, my mother started making subtle digs about us not having children. She began with what seemed like an innocent question. "How long have Daniel and Emily been married now?" We paused for a second, caught off guard. I didn't believe that my mom didn't remember when we got married, but Emily quickly answered, 4 years. My mom nodded, then continued in a tone that sounded concerned, but wasn't. 4 years and still no kids. I wonder if there's a problem. That comment brought the entire table to silence. Emily didn't say a word. Her face turned bright red from embarrassment. I felt my blood boil, my heart pounding like it was trying to break out of my chest. But my mother didn't stop. She looked over at Austin and Morgan with a proud smile and said, "Look at Austin and Morgan. Married 5 years and already have 2 beautiful children. Tommy's so smart, and Emma's just adorable." As I was about to stand up, I couldn't take any more. Emily grabbed my hand under the table, holding me back. Her hand trembled, but her eyes told me exactly what she wanted to say. She leaned in and whispered, "Stay calm, please. It's her birthday." But then Austin and Morgan chimed in, like they'd been waiting for this moment. Austin looked over at me and said, "Maybe Daniel's infertile?" Then he laughed out loud. Morgan, with a face that pretended to be concerned but was dripping with malice, added, "Or maybe it's Emily. Certain substances can affect fertility." During this entire verbal assault, my father sat completely silent, like a statue. He kept his head down, eating as if he didn't hear what was happening. But I noticed that Grandma Carol was growing uncomfortable. She set her fork down and looked around the table, first at my mother, then at Austin and Morgan, with obvious disapproval in her eyes. While everyone was still lost in sarcasm and thinly veiled jabs, my mother suddenly turned to Emily and said something I will never forget. "A woman who can't have children is useless." The entire table froze. Emily's face went pale, and her hands trembled in her lap. I could see tears welling up in her eyes. At that point, I couldn't stay silent any longer. I stood up, looked my mother in the eye, and asked, my voice shaking with anger, "What is that supposed to mean?" With a cold, almost emotionless face, My mother looked at me and said, "Look at the women in this family. Every one of them has children. Emily's the only one who doesn't." She paused, letting her words sink in. Then she added something that made my blood boil. "You should consider finding someone else to have a child for you." That was it. I couldn't take another second. Rage surged through my body like a volcano ready to erupt. I was about to explode into a full-blown argument to defend Emily, but Grandma suddenly broke the silence before I could speak. She slammed her hand down on the table with a loud thud that echoed through the room, then shouted, "That's enough." Her voice pierced the air, freezing everyone in place. The relatives who had been quietly gossiping fell utterly silent. Uncle Alan put down his wine glass. Aunt Eliana stopped chewing. My father quickly placed his fork on the table and sat up straight, his face pale. All eyes turned to Grandma. She slowly rose from her chair and looked directly at my mother. Her eyes filled with fury. In a voice cold as ice, she said, "You are hurting Emily. Having children is in God's hands, not something you get just because you want it. You have no right to speak such cruel words." I thought my mother would finally realize she had crossed a line, but she didn't. She doubled down. She fired back with defiance in her voice. "I'm just worried about my son. I have the right to say how I feel." Hearing this, Grandma grew even more furious. She looked straight at my mom and said clearly and firmly, "You will apologize to Emily, right here, right now. And Austin and Morgan will too." But my mother refused without hesitation. "I didn't do anything wrong. Why should I apologize?" Austin and Morgan backed her up, like they'd planned. Austin chimed in, "She's just speaking the truth." "What's wrong with that?" Morgan added with a serious face and fake concern. "Daniel and Emily are grown adults. They should be able to take criticism from family." Seeing her son and daughter-in-law taking her side only made my mother bolder. She said proudly, "See, I'm not the only one who feels this way." Grandma scanned the table, taking in the sight of her daughter-in-law and grandson openly defying her. Her eyes landed on my father, still frozen, silent as ever. She turned to him and said, her voice full of disappointment, "Jonathan, will you sit there and let your wife and son talk back to me like this?" My father said nothing. He sat trembling, sweat forming on his forehead, staring down at his plate like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. Seeing the only man in the house, her son, unable to speak up for what's right, broke something in Grandma. She looked around the table, then made a declaration that stunned the entire family. "You have 3 days. If you don't apologize to Emily in front of everyone here, you're all moving out of this house." They had lived in that house for over a decade since Grandpa died. It wasn't just a place to live, it represented financial stability. With home prices in Palo Alto today, there's no way they could afford anything even close if they had to leave. My mom screamed, "You can't do that. We've lived here for 10 years. Austin added, "You can't kick us out over something so small." Grandma. But Grandma had made up her mind. She looked at them with ice in her eyes and said, "This is my house. I decide who stays and who goes. I already gave you a chance. You have 3 days." Tommy and Emma, who had been happily eating cake moments ago, now looked around with wide, frightened eyes. They didn't understand what was happening, but they could feel the tension in the room. The other relatives sat silently, unwilling to interfere in this family war. Uncle Alan stared down at his plate. Aunt Eliana quietly sipped her water. As for Emily and me, we sat there in stunned disbelief. I never expected Grandma to go this far to protect my wife. Emily gripped my hand tightly, tears still in her eyes, but for the first time that night, I saw a glimmer of hope in them. What started as a birthday celebration had turned into a battlefield, and Grandma Carol had just declared war. We left the party almost immediately after Grandma stood her ground and issued that ultimatum. The tension in the house was so thick, it was impossible to stay a moment longer. Grandma didn't stay either. She quietly exited the table and returned to her room, leaving a dining room full of stunned, speechless faces. My mother said nothing as we grabbed our coats and got ready to leave. Instead, she turned to my dad and shouted in a panicked voice, "Do something! Your mother's about to kick us out of the house." My father kept his head down, as usual, but for the first time in my life, he spoke up. His voice was shaky, but his words were clear and firm. "All you have to do is apologize to Emily. That's it." My mother's eyes widened in disbelief, like she couldn't trust her hearing. In their 35 years of marriage, this was the first time my dad had ever stood up to her. But instead of reflecting on what he said, she became even angrier. She screamed in his face, "She's my daughter-in-law. There is no way I'm apologizing to her." Then she stormed away from the table and slammed the door to her room, the sound echoing through the house. One by one, the guests began to stand up and leave quietly. No one said goodbye. No one dared to speak. I did not doubt that by the end of that night, our family drama would become the center of gossip for days to come. After we got home, the first thing we did was call Grandma to thank her. Emily sat beside me on the couch, her eyes still a little red from the emotions of the evening. When I heard Grandma's voice on the phone, something inside me felt lighter. I thanked her for standing up for Emily today. Grandma said she was standing up for what she believed was right. No one has the right to hurt another person like that. Emily also got on the phone to thank her. Then Grandma gently reminded us not to let what happened get us down. She told us to keep living well and loving each other, and that everything would be okay. Children come with fate, she said. They'll show up when the time is right. After the call ended, Emily and I felt a deep sense of gratitude. At least someone in the family truly protected us. Her words soothed some of the pain my mother had caused. That night, even though we were still hurting, we felt, at the very least, that we weren't completely alone. The following 2 days passed in a heavy, suffocating silence. Emily and I didn't visit the family, and we didn't receive a single call from my mother or Austin. Emily grew quieter than usual. She still went to work usually, but I noticed her staring into space often, like she was lost in thoughts far away. Sometimes, I caught her quietly wiping away tears when she thought I wasn't looking. On the third day, Saturday afternoon, Grandma called and asked me and Emily to come over. Her voice sounded more serious than usual. When we arrived at her house, the atmosphere in the living room was thick with tension. My mother sat stiffly on the couch, my father beside her, looking uneasy. Austin and Morgan sat across from them. Their 2 kids had been sent to their maternal grandmother's house to keep them from witnessing what was going to be a difficult conversation. Grandma sat in her familiar armchair, her eyes sweeping across the room. Then she got straight to the point. Have you apologized to Emily yet? That simple question dropped into the room like a stone, followed by a long, strained silence. My mother glanced at my father, hoping he would back her up. She placed her hand on his knee, a silent cue for support. But instead of giving in, my father hesitated, then quietly spoke up. You should apologize to Emily. This has gone too far. My father found the courage to speak for the second time in 3 days. But immediately, my mother turned to him with eyes blazing. She gripped his arm tightly and hissed. What are you doing? Whose side are you on? That familiar pressure made my father instantly retreat. He shrank back into silence, head down, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Austin and Morgan still refused to budge. Austin spoke up first. We didn't say anything wrong. Not having kids after 4 years of marriage is a problem. Morgan added, her face defiant. Grandma, you're taking Daniel and Emily's side. Everyone in the family sees it. With the support of Austin and Morgan, my mother stood even firmer. She looked Grandma straight in the eye and declared, No, I did nothing wrong. I'm not apologizing. Hearing their response, Grandma's face turned cold. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she looked at each person slowly, as if weighing her next move. Finally, she stood from her chair and delivered her decision with a voice that left no room for argument. Then you all need to move out. The living room fell completely silent after her words. My heart pounded. I couldn't believe it had come to this. Emily gripped my hand tightly. The 2 of us sat there, stunned, unable to speak. A black BMW pulled up in front of Grandma's house that very afternoon. James Wilson, a sharply dressed man in his mid-40s, stepped out of the car, briefcase in hand, and walked straight inside at Grandma's request. The moment the family saw the lawyer arrive with his black leather case, panic spread across their faces. They knew then Grandma wasn't bluffing. My mother cried out, her voice filled with desperation. You can't kick us out. We've lived here for over 10 years. Grandma looked her straight in the eye and replied coldly, Then admit you were wrong and apologize to Emily. But my mother, like a spoiled child who had never been told no, stubbornly shook her head. Seeing things spiral further, my brother suddenly stood up and yelled, You're seriously playing favorites. Grandma turned to him, disappointment heavy in her eyes. Her voice was calm but sharp as a blade. You, your wife, and your 2 children have lived in my house for over 5 years. I've never asked you for a cent. So tell me, who's being favored here? Her question silenced Austin. He couldn't deny the truth. He'd lived rent-free in a nearly $3 million home. Then Morgan, my sister-in-law, tried to defend her husband. But we didn't do anything wrong. At that point, Grandma didn't even bother replying. She shook her head and motioned for the lawyer to proceed. But what disappointed me more than anything else was my father's response. He suddenly walked over to Emily in the middle of all this tension, his face filled with remorse, and he bowed his head and said, "I'm apologizing on behalf of your mother and your brother. I'm truly sorry." The moment Grandma saw what he did, she exploded. Her voice thundered through the room. "You coward! You're not my son. You spineless fool." After my father's unexpected move, no one in the room dared say a word. The only sound was the rustling of documents from lawyer James Wilson. Once he finished drafting the formal eviction notice, Mr. Wilson set up a video camera to record the official delivery of the notice, a legal safeguard in case they later tried to claim they were never warned. He also filed the notice with the court. After the lawyer left with all the paperwork complete, everyone silently scattered to their rooms. The house fell into a thick, oppressive stillness. Grandma walked Emily and me out to the front gate a little while later. As we reached it, I took her hand and said, "Thank you, Grandma, for standing up for Emily." She smiled gently, hugged Emily tightly, and said with a cryptic tone, "I had to teach them a lesson. This isn't over yet." Hearing those words, I suddenly realized there was more to Grandma's plan than she'd let on. A chill ran down my spine. What I never could have expected was just how decisive and calculating my grandmother truly was. About a week later, she happened to overhear a secret conversation between my mother and Austin in the kitchen. They thought she had gone to bed, but she was listening quietly in the hallway. My mother was the first to propose a strategy. She suggested that the whole family stay put, refusing to move out, even with legal notices in place. She also brought up the idea of using Tommy and Emma, the two young children, to emotionally manipulate Grandma into changing her mind. But Austin had a more cunning plan. He suggested that they pretend to comply, move out temporarily, wait until Grandma calmed down, and then come back. He mentioned the will, reminding my mother that they'd all inherit a share of the house once Grandma passed away. So, it would be smarter to play along for now and think long-term. What disappointed Grandma the most wasn't their scheming. It was the fact that throughout the entire conversation, neither mentioned apologizing to Emily. They weren't sorry. They were calculating, figuring out how to reclaim what they saw as theirs. After overhearing that exchange, Grandma made her boldest move yet. She decided to sell the house. I only found out about it when a friend who works in real estate called me. He told me Grandma's lawyer had quietly contacted him to help list and sell the house for $2.8 million. The sale was already in progress. Stunned, I called Grandma immediately. That's when she told me everything she had heard and why she decided. Only then did I truly understand how far Grandma was willing to go, and how serious she was about standing up for us. Just 2 weeks later, the house was officially sold. The real estate market in Palo Alto is always hot, and a 5-bedroom home in such a prime location didn't take long to find a buyer. Grandma planned to use the $2.8 million from the sale to buy a smaller home for herself somewhere in Mountain View or Sunnyvale, areas where property prices are slightly more reasonable than Palo Alto. When I heard the news, I told her over the phone, "Grandma, we've got a spare room. Come stay with us while you look for your new place." She chuckled and replied, "I'll think about it. That might not be a bad idea." Meanwhile, my mom and Austin started to panic as they realized Grandma wasn't bluffing. They scrambled to find a lawyer to stop the sale, hoping to discover some legal loophole that could block the transaction. They consulted with several attorneys, from small local firms to larger law offices in San Jose. But the answer was always the same. Since the house was in Grandma's name and she was mentally competent, there was absolutely no legal basis to stop her. When Austin asked a lawyer about the possibility of blocking the sale, the lawyer told him bluntly, "She's the legal owner. She can sell it whenever she wants." Defeated, Austin and my mother returned home, realizing their efforts had led nowhere. A week after the sale was finalized, they received an official notice, but this time, it wasn't from Grandma's lawyer. It came directly from the real estate agency that had purchased the home. They were given 30 days to vacate the property so the new owners could move in. The notice was sent by certified mail, required a signature upon receipt, and the handover process was recorded on video. There was no room to claim ignorance this time. Now they had to face the reality of leaving the house they'd lived in for 10 years. No more bargaining, no more hope that Grandma might change her mind. The house now belonged to someone else. The day they received the notice from the real estate office, my mother sat crying in the living room. Austin and Morgan began searching online for rental listings. As for my father, he said nothing. He quietly packed up his things, fully aware that their family life would change forever. Exactly 30 days later, they moved out of the house Grandma had sold. 3 weeks before that, she had already moved in with Emily and me, settling into the spare room in our 3-bedroom home. On the day they moved out, we weren't there. I didn't want to witness it, and I didn't want to add fuel to the fire. I had hoped this would be a lesson for them, that maybe, finally, they'd realize how important it is to treat others respectfully. But again, my mother, Austin, and Morgan showed no sign of stopping. As they were moving out that day, Austin secretly recorded a short video of my parents carrying boxes out to a rented moving truck. My mother's eyes were swollen from crying, her face covered in tears and desperation. Austin carefully chose angles that made them look as pitiful and sympathetic as possible. Worse still, he used his children in the video, dragging Tommy and Emma into the frame. The 2 little ones, only 5 and 3, had no idea what was happening. They just cried along with their grandmother. Tommy clutched his stuffed bear, his eyes red and puffy. Emma sat on top of a toy box, tears streaming down her cheeks. In the video, Tommy asked in a trembling voice, "Where are we going to live now, Daddy?" Austin left that question deliberately, aiming to tug at viewers' hearts. 2 days after they moved out, Austin and Morgan posted the video to a massive Facebook group called Family Drama, with over 2 million members dedicated to sharing family conflicts. The post called out Emily and me by Daniel and Emily Miller. They accused us of manipulating our 80-year-old grandmother into selling her $2.8 million home so we could steal her money. Austin wrote that we had preyed on her age and loneliness to pressure her into the sale, then pocketed the money for ourselves. What didn't they mention in the post? The cruel things my mother had said to Emily about not having children. Grandma gave them 3 days to apologize, and they refused. Instead, they painted us as greedy villains exploiting an older woman for financial gain. Austin even attached the moving day video, complete with the heart-wrenching shot of Tommy asking where they'd live, and captioned it with comments about how their family had been kicked out of their home after over 10 years. The reaction was overwhelming and brutal. Within 24 hours, the post had racked up hundreds of thousands of comments and shares, the vast majority turning against us. People wrote things like, "Evil couple, using an old lady for money. Poor kids. They didn't deserve this. Karma will get them." I only found out about the post when one of Emily's co-workers sent it to her, asking if it was her in the video. Emily broke down in tears reading the hateful comments. She felt humiliated, slandered in front of millions of strangers with no way to defend herself. As for me, I was furious, but more than that, I was crushed. I couldn't believe my brother and mother had gone this far. Holding Emily in my arms while she cried, I felt like my heart was being squeezed tight in my chest. But above all, I felt deeply disappointed in who Austin and Morgan truly were. They had no shame in dragging our names through the mud. Worse, they would use their children as props in a revenge story. It was clear they'd learned nothing from being forced out of the house. That was when I truly understood that Grandma had made the right decision in selling the home. People like that, they never change. After enduring a full day of cruel, baseless comments online, I knew we had to act. We couldn't just sit back and let Austin and Morgan destroy our reputation without standing up for ourselves. I proposed that Emily and Grandma record a response video to tell the truth. At first, Emily hesitated. She was afraid that appearing on camera might only make things worse. But Grandma gently reminded her that the truth needed to be told, and that silence would only let the lies grow. So we filmed a 13-minute video in the living room of our home. Grandma sat in the center, with Emily and me on either side. Grandma opened the video by introducing herself and recounting, in detail, what had happened at that infamous birthday party. She described how my mother mocked Emily about not having children, starting with seemingly innocent comments and escalating to cruel, humiliating insults. She didn't hold back. When Grandma got to the part where my mother called Emily useless, she paused, then said, "As a woman who's gone through childbirth myself, I understand the pain of those who struggle to have children. No one has the right to hurt them like that." She explained how she had given my family 3 full days to apologize, and how they refused. She emphasized that selling the house wasn't a rash decision. It resulted from watching them prioritize inheritance and manipulation over remorse and decency. Then Emily spoke. Her voice trembled as she recalled the pain of being humiliated in front of 25 relatives on my mother's birthday. "For 4 years, we tried everything to have a baby," she said. "We saw doctors, tried every method we could. Not having a child was already heartbreaking, and then being mocked in front of the whole family, it nearly broke me. At the end of the video, I spoke about love, respect, and boundaries. I couldn't just sit by and watch the woman I love get torn apart without doing something. Grandma taught us that respect is the foundation of any family. Grandma finished the video with a firm, unwavering message. I've lived 80 years, long enough to know who truly cares and only calculates. I have no regrets. Selling the house was the right decision. We posted the video directly under Austin's original Facebook post and created a new post titled, "The Truth About Daniel and Emily Miller's Family Story." And then, everything changed. Within hours, thousands of supportive comments flooded in. Grandma did the right thing. No one has the right to shame a woman over fertility. One person wrote, "It's obvious who's lying now. Austin and Morgan tried to twist the story," said another, gaining thousands of likes. "I stand with Daniel and Emily. A man who protects his wife is a man worth respecting." The tide of public opinion turned. People who had once condemned us now apologized and showed support. Our video was shared widely, and for the first time, the truth began to drown out the lies. But I knew one thing. The video alone wasn't enough. Austin and Morgan had inflicted real damage to our reputation, to Emily's mental health, to our peace of mind. What they had done went beyond a family feud. It was public defamation, and it had consequences. They needed to be held accountable, not just socially, but legally. After we released the response video, I filed a lawsuit against Austin and Morgan for defamation and spreading false information. They had crossed a line, deliberately twisting the truth to smear our names, and we couldn't let that go unchallenged. James Wilson, the attorney who helped Grandma with the house sale, agreed to represent us in the case. He had experience handling defamation cases related to social media and didn't hesitate to take this one on. We began gathering evidence, screenshots of the original post, the video they recorded, and hundreds of malicious comments directed at us. James explained that we had a strong chance of winning with such clear proof, especially showing that Austin and Morgan had intentionally omitted key facts while misleading millions. Emily was hesitant at first. She didn't like the idea of taking family members to court. But when she remembered the cruel comments calling us monsters and accusing us of manipulating an old woman, she supported the decision wholeheartedly. Grandma encouraged us, too. She said this needed to be seen through to the end. They need to learn, she told us, that lies and cruelty come with consequences. After discovering they were being sued, Austin, Morgan, and my mother showed up unannounced at our doorstep one Saturday evening. They came to beg us to drop the lawsuit, promising to delete the post and swearing they would never bother us again. I stood at the door and refused without hesitation. I told them it was too late. They had gone too far, exploiting their children to push a fabricated narrative and dragging our names through the mud in front of millions. But they didn't leave. Instead, they stayed at our door, pleading for nearly an hour. My mother sat on the front step crying, while Austin and Morgan stood by looking desperate and broken. Inside the house, Emily was visibly shaken. Their presence and emotional pressure made her feel trapped, even scared. She was worried they might try something worse if I didn't give in. Seeing the fear in her eyes, I knew I had to act. I called the police. 2 local officers arrived about 15 minutes later. They calmly but firmly ordered Austin, Morgan, and my mother to leave the property immediately and warned them that any further actions like this could be considered harassment. My mother sobbed and begged the officers to intervene on her behalf, but they clearly explained our right to privacy. Austin grew visibly angry about being forced to leave, but in the end, all 3 had no choice but to get in their car and drive away. After they left, Grandma looked at me with a warm, steady gaze and said, "You did the right thing." And at that moment, I thanked her again, not just for standing with me, but for giving me the strength to stand firm. 2 months later, the civil trial occurred at the Santa Clara County Court on a damp Monday morning. Emily and I arrived early, accompanied by our attorney, James Wilson, and a carefully organized stack of evidence. To our surprise, many relatives came to support us. Uncle Alan, Aunt Eliana, and several cousins sat in the courtroom, not just present, but openly speaking out against Austin and Morgan for using their children in a fabricated video. Uncle Alan even testified on our behalf, giving a detailed account of the birthday party and how my mother had mocked Emily in front of everyone. Aunt Eliana confirmed that Austin had deliberately left out the real story in his Facebook post to sway public opinion. James Wilson presented the case with calm, methodical precision. He walked the court through screenshots of the original post, our correction video, and hundreds of hateful comments. He clarified this wasn't just a misunderstanding. Austin and Morgan had knowingly distorted the truth to damage our reputation. After reviewing all the evidence, the judge ruled in our favor. Austin and Morgan were ordered to pay $15,000, $10,000 in damages for defamation, and $5,000 for legal and court fees. They were also required to delete the original post and issue a public apology on Facebook. As soon as the judge delivered the verdict, our relatives in the courtroom applauded quietly. A small but powerful gesture of support. Austin and Morgan sat frozen, pale-faced, finally understanding the weight of what they had done. As for Emily and me, we finally felt vindicated. Justice had been served, and the truth stood tall for the first time in what felt like months, and it won. After that day in court, our lives changed in unexpected ways. My mother, Austin, and Morgan were forced to rent a small 2-bedroom apartment in San Jose. Between the $15,000 fine and the rising cost of rent, their financial situation became more strained than ever. Austin had to take on evening shifts to cover expenses, while Morgan stayed home in their cramped apartment to care for the kids. But the most surprising decision came from my father. After more than 35 years of marriage, he filed for divorce and chose to live on his own. He rented a modest studio apartment in Mountain View, finally free from the control and pressure of my mother. I saw a sense of calm and quiet peace on his face for the first time. As for Grandma, after selling the house, she decided not to buy a new one. When I offered to care for her and asked if she'd like to live with us permanently, she agreed without hesitation. But what she did next completely stunned us. One afternoon, Grandma called Emily and me to sit down. Then she calmly revealed her plan for dividing the $2.8 million from the house sale. A thoughtful, fair, and shockingly well-prepared plan. First, she set aside $200,000 for my father to help him start his new life after the divorce. Despite his mistakes, she said he was still her only son and deserved a second chance. Then, to our surprise, she made it clear she hadn't forgotten Tommy and Emma, 2 innocent children caught in the middle. She gave each of them $200,000, placed in a trust fund that could only be accessed after they turned 18, and strictly for college tuition. She named Emily and me as the trustees of those funds, to prevent Austin and Morgan from misusing the money. The majority of the amount, $2 million, she gave to me and Emily. When we tried to refuse, overwhelmed by how much it was, she stopped us and said, "This is my gift to you, part of how I make things right." The remaining $200,000 she kept for herself, just in case of emergencies, medical needs, or anything unexpected. Emily and I were in tears. Grandma's love, foresight, and fairness left us speechless. She hadn't just protected us when others tried to tear us down. She planned for everyone's future, even those who had hurt us most. From that moment on, a new chapter began in our lives, one filled with peace, stability, and a sense of belonging we had never felt before. Life had become peaceful and meaningful nearly a year after Grandma moved in with us. Emily had returned to teaching. I focused on growing my career, and Grandma enjoyed being cared for in a loving home. Then, one morning in March, everything changed. Emily came running out of the bathroom, holding a pregnancy test in her hand, tears in her eyes. After 5 long years of waiting, we finally got the news we had dreamed of. We would have a baby. She was 6 weeks pregnant. We believed that stepping away from the stress of family conflict and living in an environment filled with love had finally given her body the peace it needed to conceive. When we told Grandma, she was overjoyed. She wrapped Emily in a tight hug and said, "This is the reward God gives to good people." We decided not to share the news with my mother or Austin. After everything that had happened, we wanted to keep this moment sacred, something just for our little family. Only my father was told. When I called to share the news, he cried out of pure happiness and promised to be our child's best grandfather. 9 months later, Emily gave birth to a healthy baby girl weighing 3.2 kilograms at Stanford Hospital. We named her Ava, a simple name that symbolized a new beginning. The moment Grandma Carol held Ava for the first time was one of the most beautiful things I've ever witnessed. She sat in her familiar armchair, holding Ava in her trembling arms, eyes shining with indescribable joy. It was as if every hardship she had ever faced was worth it, just for this moment. My father visited often to spend time with his granddaughter. At least twice a week, he came by with toys and clothes for Ava. Since his divorce, I'd seen him grow into a more confident and joyful version of himself. No longer living under control or pressure, but finally free. Watching 4 generations gather under one roof, Emily and I felt deeply grateful, especially for Grandma. She didn't just protect us. She showed us what family love truly means. In the end, we finally found the happiness we had always deserved. After everything that had happened and nearly 3 years of no contact, my mother showed up in our lives again. Just yesterday, on an ordinary weekend afternoon, I was playing with Ava in our backyard when I heard the doorbell. I opened the door and saw my mother standing there, looking worn down and much older than the last time I had seen her. She said she wanted to apologize to Emily and me for everything that had happened. She told us she had realized her mistakes and hoped to rebuild the family relationship. More importantly, she said she wanted to meet Ava, the granddaughter she had never seen. Seeing her standing there with tear-filled eyes, I felt a moment of hesitation. But then I remembered the cruel things she had said to Emily, how she had hurt my wife in front of the entire family, and I said no. I told her that, after everything, I couldn't trust that she wouldn't hurt my family again. She had no choice but to leave, her shoulders trembling as she walked away. When I told Emily what had happened, she looked sad. She said she had already forgiven my mother and, if possible, would like to give her a chance to meet Ava. She believed that becoming a grandmother might help my mother change. But I said no. I explained to Emily that I couldn't take the risk of letting them hurt her or our daughter again. The past had already shown how cruel my mother could be when she wanted to be, and I didn't want Ava growing up in that kind of environment. After I shared my thoughts, Emily nodded in agreement, even though I knew she still hoped for reconciliation deep down. Grandma Carol also fully supported my decision. She said that some people never change, and protecting our small family must come first. What about you? What do you think about my decision? If you were in my shoes, after everything that had happened, from mocking my wife to launching a smear campaign online, would you give my mother a chance to come back and meet Ava? Please leave your thoughts below in the comments. I genuinely want to hear what this community thinks. Whether I should open my heart to forgiveness or continue protecting my family the way I have. That's the end of my story. Thank you for staying with me and listening to this from the bottom of my heart. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, and share the story if you found it meaningful. Once again, thank you so much.